Now, strangely enough, during the early centuries of Christianity, treatment of many diseases relied almost entirely on prayer. Now, a 7th century Irish monk called St. Fiacre acquired the rather dubious honour of becoming the patron saint for hemorrhoid sufferers. You can tell by the look on his face, really, can't you? Now, apparently Fiacre developed hemorrhoids from digging in the monastery garden, and to soothe the pain, he actually sat on a large stone, which gave him a miraculous cure. That brings
Geri's taken on this topic of medical history through art, and I think she's absolutely marvellous. She's found some incredible pictures, and I think she puts together a great talk.
Her whole presentation, I think, was excellent, and I have heard her talk before. She's a very popular speaker.
Some of the rather ridiculous treatments of the day by suggesting that drinking punch might be a cure-all for gout, colic and tisic, which was actually consumption. So if you had your punch, you could cure everything. It started, I think, probably in my childhood. I was always fascinated by images and art, and what did it actually mean, I think, is probably what really intrigued me. But I had the chance to study in more depth after I gave up work to have kids and couldn't cope with singing the wheels on the bus anymore. So I started studying. I got a little bit addicted and ended up going from a sort of BA to an MA to a PhD without drawing breath and having a fantastic time in the process. So my research was really around religious art. But from that, it gave me a love of investigating things that people hadn't looked at before. So I staggered from the catacombs in Rome to 21st century Mexico, really looking at how religion has had an effect on the politics and the art of that country as well. I spent some time in Peru a few years ago, came up with some absolutely fantastic images of gun-toting angels, because in Peru they interpret the angelic host as being the army of God. So they have some amazing weapons, including huge, great arquebus, musket-type guns. So they paint their angels fully armed. Now, if you weren't dying from the plague or other assorted epidemics, then the odds are that you would probably have got caught up in one of the many wars that were being constantly waged across Europe at the time. And you may have suffered from one or other of a variety of horrific battlefield injuries. Now, this famous illustration was created as a guide for surgeons. I don't think anyone really did have quite that many different injuries, but it was a guide. It was something that was they could look at, and it could be one of the many wounds that they had to treat. I started lecturing first completely by chance. I was asked by Centre for Marian Studies in Cambridge to come and give a talk on the research I've been doing on the early iconography of Mary. And I had never lectured to anyone before, and I was absolutely terrified. But as I started to talk, I realised that I actually rather liked this, A, because I was a show-off, and B, because the audience was beginning to laugh at what I said. So it was a mix of being a stand-up comic and also imparting information that fascinated me. So I was completely hooked at that point. And since then, I've been all over the world lecturing, mainly as an accredited NADFAS lecturer. But I've also lectured in the British Museum, I've lectured at the Courtauld, I've lectured in other galleries around the country.
Well, she has a touch. She has she captures the audience very early, and she doesn't tell, bawdy jokes. She just tells humour.
Well, here we are in St Eustatius Church in Tavistock, and it gives me a chance to tell you a little bit about this extraordinary William Morris window. Now, this is created by the designer William Morris, but actually designed by his good friend Edward Burne-Jones, who he ran the Morris Company with. Now, the interesting thing about the window is that there is a theory, and it is a theory, that the face of one of the apostles in the window is actually modelled on Edward Burne-Jones's ex-lover, the very feisty Greek artist Maria Zambacco. And Maria and Edward tried to run away together on several occasions, but Edward kept losing his nerve. There was a failed suicide pact, And in the end, he finally gave up his lover, and having given her up, he was haunted by her face and the guilt of the affair, and he included images of her in many of his paintings, and some suggest even in this image of St. Luke in the stained glass window. In the 16th century, the German-Swiss physician Philippus von Hohenheim, also known as Paracelsus, had actually not only founded the discipline of toxicology, but he had become the first person to use ether as an anaesthetic. Now, it didn't catch on, and most operations continued to be performed using a variety of very toxic potions to knock out or to deaden the patient, as they called it. I mean, most of them would remain deadened because permanently, because they didn't recover from what they were given to make them go to sleep. I talk about everything from prehistoric cave art right through to the history of Fleet Street, and most recently I'm doing a new talk on from magic lanterns to MGM, so it's the history of the development of the film industry and the artists that have been influenced by movies as well. So it's a real ragbag of different topics, and I'm constantly adding to it. And of course the history of medicine in art, which is a bit of a gruesome variation, which usually ends up with at least one person passing out. And some of the greatest caricaturists of the time would often use the medical profession as the brunt of their acerbic wit. Now, this is a very jolly amputation scene, courtesy of the artist Thomas Rowlandson. Now, it seems that amputees were treated just as badly in the 18th century. Because I get as much back from the people I share the information with as I probably give to them.